I work at the Center for Sustainable Entrepreneurship here at Odisee, full-time. And some publicity, shamelessly publicity for our research center. We're combining theory and practice. We are doing academically rigorous work, but we're focused on developing practical tools. We're doing this mainly focused on family firms, family businesses, and small, medium enterprises. But at the same time, we're doing this across different fields or different topics. We do this with 19 people in total, 10 full-time equivalent people. We're working currently on 16 different research projects, Erasmus+, Horizon, ASF, you name it. And we do this over 5 different fields, let's say. Sustainable business models or sustainable entrepreneurship, circular economy, social entrepreneurship, competencies for the future, and, well, that's digitalization. Obviously, if you think about AI, for instance, is a hot topic. It's definitely also something start diving into in most recent times. That's about, the 2 minutes advertisement I have to do for my boss. Otherwise, he might not be happy with that if I'm not saying anything. Anyway, internationalization. I agree. You need to broaden up your horizons, and you can only gain so much. Yes, sometimes you may face some tensions, you may face some misunderstandings. Maybe in some cultures, certain ways or approaches or the way we talk or the way we address things may not be well understood. But if we understand one another, and we see, for instance, well, maybe some people will communicate more directly, some people will be a little bit more between the lines. Maybe some people will say, hey, let's make a decision collectively together. Or some people say, no, we're going to do this top-down. If the boss says so, that's what we're going to do. Or one of my favorites, when a decision has been made, do we revisit that decision, or are we just going to go forward with it? I'm talking about, for instance, some German colleagues that I know who, they take their time to make a decision, but once a decision is made, we're not going to change the decision. And then you have in the US where there is, for instance, very quickly some decisions being made, but every week you will alter the decision. Well, if you think about it, these international differences, they are foundational. And they are important to understand and to acknowledge when you want to collaborate. Now, collaboration, actually working laptop. So what did he do? He started going through these companies and said, listen, we're going to come pick it up. We have a technology, we have an approach that's going to make sure that it's wiped clean. 100%, no data leak, no data security issue. It's clean. You're going to donate this to us. We're going to take care of the security issue. And you're going to pay us a little fee for it, which was ridiculously low, like 50 euros or something for a laptop, which for a company like Deloitte or whatever not, it's peanuts. Since they started doing this with this business, they've had 0 data breaches. So the technology has been proven to work perfectly well. So this idea started being scaled. And as you can see, since between 2003 and 2023, 1.5 million assets, electronic assets, laptop, but also desktop and whatever not, they have been able to take in, refurbish, and then ship it out for educational and social projects in developing countries. I think the first one that they started with was Kenya. And that's how it started. It's a very simple idea. Then they start working together with, for instance, DHL. I think it was for the logistics. And then they worked together with KLM, Dutch airline company. And with everyone, they start talking. It's like, okay, Deloitte, you're going to give this to us. It's a donation. It's a little fee for you. We pick it up. Then they say, okay, but we're now going to collaborate with another type of organization to do the logistic for us. Now we're going to talk to KLM. With KLM, they managed to have an agreement that whatever was not used in the cargo bay of the plane, because usually planes are not 100% fully loaded, whatever was left unused, they were able to use it. They were given it for free so that they could ship the cargo over to Kenya. Didn't cost anything for KLM, except that for them it's a CSR activity. It's like, yeah, sure, we do this out of goodness for a social project. And then over there, they start developing local partnerships. Close the gap, I'm gonna, because if I want, I can spend an hour talking only about them. We'll have a look on their website. They have, if I remember correctly, about 100 different types of organizations collaborating with them, locally, logistically, financially, strategically. So for instance, Deloitte, because of some connections, they were able to say, well, for instance, we're gonna do your books every year for free. KLM, it started then becoming with other airlines and other companies to expand their reach. The collaborations they had with the American company that did the data wiping, they bought it actually over after 15 years or 20 years. That was the only time that I've heard about like them buying actually a partnership over. But other than that, they have a humongous network, ecosystem of partnerships. And Olivier van den Ende, its founders, I mean, I have him on LinkedIn, he's every day constantly talking to all kinds of people. Constantly partnerships development. Just to tell you that this is the kind of guy, oh yeah, by the way, and their team is no more, I think, than 8 full-time equivalent people. Huh? 8 people who work in a team, but a network of about 100 organizations around them. There is another case like that, which I'm not saying whether or not this was one of the case studies used for the paper, but Goods to Give, another Belgian social enterprise. There was a certain number that was quite painful to hear, that there's a certain percentage amount, and now I'm forgetting the percentage actually, which is horrible on a keynote moment, but it was pretty significant. I would dare say like something, for instance, like 1 in 8 person living in Belgium is living under the poverty line. 1 in 8. And at the same time, on an annual basis, there are hundreds and thousands of non-food products just being thrown away. So you have people who can't get access to some products, and at the same time, there are so many products that are just being thrown away, even though you could perfectly well repurpose and redistribute and recycle. Doesn't make any sense. Well, in numbers, from 2023, they have 63 partner organizations who provide materials, 500 poverty organizations as partners, and they've been able in 2023 to redistribute 2.6 million non-food products across Belgium. Again, power of collaboration, the power of developing those partnerships that really matter. And also there, the organization is not that big of an organization. But you could perfectly well apply this model that we developed and see that indeed, because of their focus on the fit of values, agile structures, communications, partnership development, there is this iterative process of aligning with the right people and reflecting how things are done. Now, that's for the social entrepreneurship part. Over the last few years, and when I started working here at Odisee, in 2021, I was part of what we call praktijkwetenschappelijk onderzoek, practice scientific research project, from 2021 till 2023. And the question there was, how do you develop a circular economy? We were asked to follow up 3 municipalities in Flanders who, let's say, were being incentivized by the Flemish government, but also by the European Union, in nurturing the circular economy on a local level. We were just, being a fly on the wall. We were just sitting there, just purely observing. We had nothing to do with their work. We were interested in, doing research. And the question was, okay, so how do you achieve a circular economy? How do you, stimulate this local circular economy if currently it's just a linear one? For your information, if I'm talking about a circular economy, I'm talking about a system, an economic system that focuses on eliminating as much as possible waste. Is it by repurposing, reusing, recycling? I mean, recycling is usually the one thing that we know the most, right? But there are about 9 to 10, according to whatever model or theory you're using, there are about 10 different strategies you can use to develop a circular economy. Great. But that's for companies. That's for organizations. The question then is, okay, if the municipality knows somehow we need to stimulate the circular economy, that means we need to bring in companies, non-profit organizations, researchers, academics, the most difficult people you can imagine. And you need to somehow make them agree on what we need to do as a local region. How do you do this? 2021, September 2021, I started working at Odisee. In October 2021, 1 month later, we had the agreement with 3 municipalities that we were allowed to follow up, to see, just, sit there during the meetings, just to discuss. 1 month later, our project manager had to go earlier on in pregnancy leave. And then I had another colleague who unfortunately had to switch projects. So all of a sudden I was there alone with 1 extra partner. And 3 municipalities looking at us asking, okay, so you guys are supposed to be the expert on this. And I was like, yeah, sure. What should I do? So I did what I had the impression like, okay, let's do a second PhD then, because why not, Stockholm Syndrome is an annoying thing. So I said, let's dive into the literature. Let's not reinvent the hot water. Let's see what the literature has to say, academic literature, on how you develop a circular economy. But actually not how you develop a circular economy. How do you develop a sustainable partnership? Power of collaboration. It was already in my mind at the time, even though I didn't name it like that. I said, okay, we need somehow to have formal collaborations between people from different corners, different sectors from society. They need to work together, not just for the short run, not just for the next political cycle of 4 years. No, we need them to work together for the next 10, 15, 20 years. It needs to be inclusive. There is a theory called the quintuple helix model, which means that you need to have people from academia, industry, civil society, organization, and business within the boundaries or the limitations of nature, of what your environment can offer. So question is, how do you make sure a partnership is inclusive, focus on the long term, and focus on achieving sustainability through circular transition efforts? All right, let's dive into it. So in 1 year time, we were able to go through more than 150 articles, and we came up with these 3 building blocks. Interestingly enough, they're coincident, and I did not, by the way, check my presentation beforehand with what Anne Verret was going to say or whatever was going to happen, so I was happy that it wasn't going in the same direction. But first of all, everything starts with a shared vision, a unified vision. It doesn't make sense, people coming up with different backgrounds, different agendas, different jargon, different languages, to start working together if you don't agree on what is the same goal. I'm not much, for instance, of a football person, but it doesn't make sense if half of your team is going to be playing aggressively and the other half of the team is playing defensively. If one says we need to score as many points as possible, and if we get a few yellow cards or red cards, that's fine, and the other one says, well, we just need to make sure to win and tactically get some points at the end of the game. Doesn't make sense. So what is the vision? What do we want to achieve? How are we going to get there? By which kind of principles or values are we going to work together? What defines us as an entity, as a whole, as a collective? Is there some kind of stewardship philosophy present? Now, anyone who knows what stewardship philosophy means? Okay, anyone ever heard about agency theory or agency issues? All right. In short, imagine that you're an investor. You're all investors in a company. It's December, it's the end of the year, and you know that at the end of the year you're going to get a good dividend, you're going to get some return on investment, because that's what you're interested in. Great. You're not following up the day-to-day basis and activities in the organization because whatever, that's not your main business. What your main business is to get your return. You want to get payday, you want to get money. Great. The CEO of that company, on the other hand, is constantly following up on things. And guess what? The CEO, by December, says, man, I'm going to have to make sure to do some investments because there are some materials, there's some machinery that needs to be renewed. I'm not going to do it now in December. If I do that, our numbers are going to go down, and I can forget my bonus at the end of the year. I'm not going to do that. I'll do it in January. This is what we call information asymmetry, right? The CEO knows much more than what you as an investor have, but you're assuming that the CEO is going to act in the best interest of the investor because, well, he's your agent. So maybe there's going to be somehow a certain behavior from the agent occurring that's not going to be in your best interest. And maybe this year you're going to be like, hey, great, we did great. And then next year, oh shit, we got a huge investment round now coming. And why? We were never aware of this. Trust issues. And usually what they have nowadays are mechanisms to make sure that, the CEO has the same kind of interest as the investor by, for instance, linking their bonuses to, some stocks that they have. Stewardship theory says the opposite. You don't need to follow up on how people behave or what people do, because you know that these people will do whatever is in the best interest of the collective, despite or in spite of their own personal individual needs. It's a fluffy idea, but it exists. There's even something that has been developed lately as a trend within the social entrepreneurship field in Belgium. That more and more there is this voice crying out for more stewardship-owned organizations. And it's something that was also present in the literature, even though it wasn't called like this in the literature. That's if you want to achieve a circular economy, if you want to transition from a linear to a more sustainable economy, you need to have this kind of mindset and these kind of individuals present in your organization, in the collective. If you don't have that, it's not necessarily going to be successful on the long run. So, if people are indeed driven by intrinsic motivations, if people are indeed driven and share this philosophy and share these principles, you can move forward by the second building block, which mainly is also something that usually no one really talks about at some point, is who's going to do what and who's going to put what on the table. This is a moment that, okay, we kind of establish trust amongst each other, we know where we're going to go forward. This is the moment to be vulnerable. This is a moment to say, okay, these are the activities we can do. These are, our resources, our capacities, our potential, but also our limitations. And everyone puts this on the table and nobody necessarily judges one another for it, but tries to find a collective solution. So you have a common vision. You said who is going to do what. How are you now going to go through the process of development? Which, by the way, majority of the literature will always say like, well, if you're developing something, you go from, inception, development, maturity, and there we are. We achieved it. One of the theories we're developing now is saying actually the opposite. Well, not necessarily the opposite, it's more refined, saying, yes, you have an inception, you have an initiation, a development, you have something that is established, and then you will have to reflect on it and go back to it. Revisit your assumptions and your fundamentals. Revisit if there is trust, if principles are present, if people are driven by certain values, if indeed everyone's taking on the right roles and the right activities. Because if you don't, if you just assume, and I'm not sure who said it once, but to assume is to make an ass out of you and me. So these building blocks were then presented to the different municipalities saying, well, focus on this first as a guideline to transition and to make sure that everyone is on board. Then we went even more into depth. We did a lot of interviews, a few focus group discussions and observations. And we said, okay, but what kind of roles are we then talking about? And we saw as a broad categorization, we said, well, you have some distributive, investigative, provision, executive. Okay, what do I mean by this? You will need connectors, matchmakers, and coordinators. You will need people who will analyze, who investigate, who review, who provide knowledge. You will need users. You will need people who will actually implement circular projects and circular ideas. But you also will need, in the provision round, you will also need certain funders in order to sustain the collective effort. So in other words, we created this categorization, and this is currently under review, this work. But we said, like, well, you have different types of roles, depending on what kind of resources, knowledge, money, people, material is going to somehow be shared or flowing amongst the different stakeholders. And there are some specific principles that were mentioned across all the interviews as saying, being important to create this trusting environment, this collaborative environment. But also in the middle, there is something as a dark side to these collaborations. Reviewer number 2, which was fairly critical of our work, said, okay, what you're presenting is nice and all, but that's a pink image you're offering. You should also focus on potential challenges, mistrust, misalignments, power imbalances, because that's the real world. That's the real deal. So, and not everybody necessarily has resources or knowledge to contribute equally to the collaboration. So be mindful of it and make sure that you talk about these things up front without necessarily feeling that you will be attacked for it. Finally, how am I doing, by the way, on time? 10 minutes? All right. Finally, we had a last project called the European Social Innovation Campus. Working together with 15 partner organizations across Europe, 9 European countries, the question was, how do you develop a European unified social innovation campus? I can tell you by experience, if you ask 9 different countries and 15 different types of organizations what social innovation means, you will get 15, if not more, different answers. Yet we were asked, okay, can you go through the literature and tell us what is needed that social innovation need to know to be successful? So we went through the literature and we said, okay, there are some foundational competencies, so skills, knowledge, or attitudes that are required for this. There are some specialization competencies. Why am I mentioning this? Not necessarily for the content, but more likely to ask yourself, when you're doing international collaborations, have you thought about this? Have you thought about, do we have the proper skills, competencies, attitudes to collaborate with others? Are we having, certain learning, digital sustainability, collaboration skills on board or not? Who in your team is best composed to start working together with others? Who is specialized in what? Who is the manager? Who is more entrepreneurial? Who is more like an innovator? Depending on that, you might want to rethink within your team, but also across the collective, who do you want to have on board? On a little side note, anyone ever read the book of Erin Meyer, The Cultural Map? If you haven't, read it. It helped me in my personal relationship with my wife, because it helped me to understand as well, maybe we don't decide on things the same way, maybe we don't talk about things the same way, we don't communicate maybe in the same way. But if you're aware of it, you're going to be much more capable of handling misunderstandings. I'm talking about experience, by the way, right here. And by the way, this is not like a rule, right? This is more like a guideline, because I'm probably on some of the stuff not your typical Belgian, but at least you are aware of it. So, and no, I don't have any investments or stocks from Erin Meyer, but it's a good book. Anyway, I know I'm a little bit short on time, so I'm going to try to wrap up some slides, and then I will come back to maybe some reflections with what you have shared. I said I'm a pracademic, which means that I will focus about, and I was calculating, 80% of my time is somehow related to projects, which means I need to take on several hats, several roles in my day-to-day operations. At the same time, I'm also trying to be a researcher, which means there is always a constant pressure on, well, I have my personal goal of setting up a library one day with all the books and all the papers and everything I wrote, because in the end, I want to contribute to a lifelong learning environment. I want to help the next generation to focus on these collaborations, no longer have this individualistic mindset of, you, the rational person, will achieve things. No, we, as a collective environment, as a collective entity, we will achieve something. Which also made me realize I'm probably working 150% of my time and not 100. It's not a typo. But as a key message I wanted to give you today is the following. That co-creation lies at the heart of sustainable partnerships. That there are 4 guiding principles you should remember from the presentation of today. Is that 1, a unified vision is the start of everything. Co-creation, not everybody thinks about it in the same way, not everybody is going to handle in the same way. And that's okay. Just keep the communications going, keep it open, and integrate everybody's voice so that you can literally achieve conflicting objectives at times through an iterative process of alignment and reflection. 2, make sure that your structures, whatever it is, whether it is in projects and collaborations or within your organization, make sure that there is not too many hierarchies. Stay agile, stay flexible. Encourage people to take up a contributing role and be engaged in whatever process you need to go through so that you can have trust amongst people and potential power imbalances are reduced. 3, make sure that your values are at the core of everything that you do. There are some good books related to values-driven innovation that we can talk about later on if you want. But if you build up teams, the strongest kind of teams that you will have are teams that are focused or centered around specific values. Because you will have people who are intrinsically motivated to achieve something, even if they want to see it happening in different ways. It builds trust. And focus, especially on this co-creation process, it's a lifelong journey. It's something that will not happen from today to tomorrow. It's something that will happen over and over and over again over the next decade or 2. So make sure to think about how you can grow the other person and not necessarily yourself. And think about the long-term objectives you want to achieve instead of what you want to achieve on the short term. So maybe to leave off with a little quote, and I'm sorry I talk a lot, I know. And I thought about doing some Mentimeters to have some more interactions, but I'm guessing I'm a little bit out of time. It's something that Harry Truman once said. It is amazing what you can achieve or what you can accomplish if you do not care who gets the credit. So if we wanted to talk about the power of collaborations, I would rather say the power of sustainable partnerships. Thank you for your attention.